Welcome to another episode of Tanstwocents. Today's episode is Disrupt the Game, what smart GovCon leaders are doing now. I'm your host, Tanwilson, and joining me here today is Ron Jones, the CEO of G2 Exchange, a platform that is fundamentally changing how we track, compete, and win in the GovCon space. We're removing the curtain on what's happening in the market regarding the old rules. They don't work anymore. And we're talking about the disruption already in play, the firms quietly dominating behind the scenes, and what you need to do to stay relevant and to win. So, Ron leads one of the most influential platforms in government contracting, known for delivering real time industry intelligence, business development insights, and community driven content that helps GovCon professionals and companies stay ahead of the curve. And under his leadership, G2 Exchange has become a trusted hub for opportunity tracking, federal health updates, and collaborative intelligence. All of this is designed to fuel smarter decisions and faster action. And with a deep background in strategic growth and a firm finger on the pulse of the federal market shift, Ron doesn't just report on change, he helps the industry make sense of all of it. So, Ron, welcome. And finally, a guest on Ton's Two Cents podcast. Say hello to our intellectuals.
Yes, finally.
I know, right? And for those who don't know
Finally,
you,
it's been over a year, right? It's been a year since since over a year since you started this. So I'm finally, here. I'm happy to be here. Appreciate you having me. And to all the intellectuals tuning in, it's great to connect with you and Ton with you as well. It's been a long time coming.
it really has, and it's been a wonderful journey. And I want to say that when I started my podcast, you and Alexa were like, "We're behind you," and so you are the OG
Right.
of Tons Two Cents, podcast sponsors and supporters. And we will flash up a code here. So we do have a special code and a discount for our intellectuals. We'll put this up again here during our episode, but for those who don't know you, don't know your background, I love the fact
Yeah.
that you're a techie and you still do programming and coding and like cool things like that.
Yeah. So I've got an interesting path, right? I mean, I can take it way, way, way back. I think my first summer job was for a NASA, summer program for high school students to get exposure to robotics, programming, things like that. So I probably shouldn't have even been able to do this job. I think I was too young, but I was a teacher's assistant for the summer program, teaching the basics of computer programming. We used a little tool called Corel, where
I
give
remember.
instruct. You basically create basic algorithms. You know Corel? Okay, so
I've heard of it.
you tell a
Listen,
robot
yeah.
how to go. Okay. Well, you basically tell a robot to go around the grid and pick up little beepers, and that was a lot of fun. And I got to do a lot of robotic building and all types of stuff. But being able to help teach those classes to high school students much older than I was kind of my first summer job. Moving on, I wanted to get into politics. And went off to college and thought that's what I was going to do. And I spent some time interning for Congressman John Lewis at his DC office, which was a lot of fun. But at some point, a light switch flipped rather, and I thought I should be more pragmatic and just do what I'm good at. Focus on what I have a higher chance of executing on successfully, and went into software development. So had an opportunity to work as a contractor at Department of Education. This is a long time ago, and that was my very first job. I was doing cold fusion. Some of the intellectuals in the community may understand, or know what that is. Scripting language, and that was a pretty fun job. Moved on to, and as a matter of fact, before we move on from that, we can talk about sudden change in relation to that job a little bit later. But moved on to an opportunity at the Treasury Department, specifically SIGTARP, the Special Inspector General for the Troubled Asset Relief Program. helping out with their case management and evidence gathering system. That was really rewarding. And then finally, moved on to a global consultancy. And what we did there, what I did there was primarily defense and state, local, and law enforcement contracting. Spent many years there, cut my teeth on technical sales, and eventually moved into more of a growth function over time. From there, I went to a company called Blue Prism, global RPA providers. Some of your
Yep.
audience may know who they are. Did some good work in federal, again, defense and civilian, but also state, local. Did some work in the Canadian federal government. Also interfaced with the team over in the UK that was doing some work for a National Health Service over there. From there, went to IBM Federal, working on their data platforms unit, and that incredible team. I think if they hear this, this is one of my favorite teams I've ever had the opportunity of working with at IBM Federal, and from there was recruited to come on board and turn this,
Yeah.
turn G2X into its full potential.
Yeah. No, and
So long history of technical and growth related
exactly.
roles.
And I think this is why I've always kind of enjoyed our conversations, because you have there are people in our industry where you have conversations with them and it never diverges from a specific topic, right? But every time you and I talk, it's always about like random topics that kind of come up
Yeah.
in the normal span of conversations. And so kind of like your path to where we are right now is, I'm actually a trained chemist. I have a degree in chemistry and political science.
I did not know that. So what's funny? My mom is a chemist.
Yeah, and
I did not know that.
all smart women are chemists. And so like we kind of go in this, like random zigzaggy type of, path to GovCon. And so yeah, so I came to DC to manage a HUD contract. Which is, because of my chemistry degree and things like that. And that's kind of, like why I do what I do now. But
Right, right.
politics wise too, I ran for a state house. I used to run political campaigns when I was in my like early mid 20s. And so like that love for politics and policy and governance, I think is,
And we've had these
yes.
conversations. I mean, so I think you did say you were going to help me when I decided to run, right?
I'm gonna have
Wink,
to
wink.
run first. So like, yeah, so I'll help you, you help me, even though I think we're on the two different ends of the political spectrum, but that's okay. Um, we will cross the aisle. Um, but yeah, I think it's always really kind of interesting. But the one last thing I will say about your technical background is that when I was in college, I needed an extra credit before I graduated. And someone was like, "Oh, you should take C program. Oh, come take this class with me at C programming." Okay. And I was like,
Hmm.
"Oh, I can take C programming. Sure." I was not a computer major, by the way. So I took the C programming class, and I got to the class, and Dr. Farabella, I remember him like it was yesterday. He goes, "Ton, I think you're in the wrong class, and I will not I will not think less of you if you if you consider opting out or just auditing my class." And I go, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "C
Right,
programming."
right.
It was C plus programming. I was like, "This is computer plus programming."
Hmm.
So no, C does not stand for computer programming. C
C does not stand for it. Right. So how did the class turn out? How did it all
uh,
work out?
it kicked my ass, but can I tell you, it made
Oh, man.
sense. And so I'm so much better for it. Like I was glad, and he was actually the one who presented me my colors during baccalaureate. So I was like, he made such an
Oh, wow.
indelible impression. I was like,
Yeah.
no, you got to do this. Um,
Yeah. I mean, it's the beauty of algorithmic thinking. I think it helps in so many arenas. It's a really important foundational concept that I think all people should have some exposure to.
yeah, Yeah, exactly. I think it's a great basic class. So, um, oh my God, you and I are gonna have to like really watch our time here because we could just kind of have conversations like this forever. But before we dive into like the details of everything, I want to have like a really fun question for you because, changing
Okay.
GovCon, I think I'm a big movie fan, and so I think sometimes it could be a scene from like a TV drama, reality TV show, or a Marvel movie. And so, like when significant shifts, like the one we're experiencing now, like hits, funding changes, leadership shakeups, people getting fired, hired, like whatever. Are you a like Olivia Pope from Scandal, who's like quietly fixing things behind the scenes, with this calm, calculated plan? Or are you more like one of my favorite characters, like Tony Stark, right? Like Iron Man, building solutions in real time, and
You know,
like the end of the world is about to happen. Like, which one are you?
I would definitely say I'm a Tony Stark. If there was one, I mean, he's obviously a lot more in a lot more glamorous, realm, than we are, but in doing fun stuff with actual hard technology, which is more fun than software, in my opinion. I would say, I do a lot behind the scenes. I'm not as out in the open as my counterpart and partner, Alexa, Alexa Choi. She's definitely more the Olivia Pope though,
Yeah,
but she's front and center. She's not. There's not much behind the scenes about Alexa. I mean, she
she's all
she
out
comes
there.
in and gets things done.
Yeah,
She's out there, and she's amazing at that. And we are complete opposites in that sense. I'm very much, an introvert. If you subscribe to Myers Briggs, the MBTI, I'm an INTJ, and I can confirm that. I'm confident in that as many times as I've taken the MBTI in my professional career. So, and I think she's the exact
I'm an
opposite.
ESTJ,
So
so yeah, I'm your opposite.
okay, so that makes
Yeah,
so that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. So definitely Tony Stark. I mean, if for example, right now, I have three different iterations or three different windows of my IDE open, integrated development environment, and I'm working on a few different internal tools. So I do a lot of our internal tooling to help support our engineering team, and I do a few. I do contribute to a few externally facing projects, but primarily internal tooling. And I'm building this stuff, and now with the advent of AI too, which has
yeah,
been I haven't developed in years as a job, right? But with the advent of AI and the pace at which it's exploding and evolving, I'm able to get so much
hmm,
done in a week's time, in a day's
yep,
time. I mean, it's incredible the force multiplier that it is, or that it's become, and that is still, growing to become. As a matter of fact, Google just released a new model called Gemini 2.5. And Gemini's been out for a while, but 2.5 Pro, and you know, if anybody's listening, I'd recommend interfacing with that model, trying it out. It is the absolute best model, in my opinion, out there to
wow,
do technical tasks. So math, coding, it's incredibly good. And these things keep getting better
yep,
and better and better. And like I said, more rapidly. So definitely Tony Stark. I build a lot of stuff, and sometimes my engineering team doesn't like that. So I try not to be too disruptive, but
yeah,
I've been a tinkerer, my whole life, and it's not just coding. I actually build a lot of stuff in the real world, and like I won't get into it, but like carpentry, and you got you know Legos. I mean, I got a lot. I got a ton of hobbies. So yeah, that was a long-winded way of answering the question,
Tony
but yeah,
Stark. Okay.
definitely Tony Stark.
Yeah.
Tony Stark.
No, I have the spirit of Tony Stark, but I am Olivia Pope through and through. It's like I like being the puppet
Hmm.
master behind things. I like influencing things. I love kind of being in the know of everything. So yeah, that's why you get those, like random 11
Yeah.
p.m. like messages from me like, "Hey, can you do can we like yeah, we'll talk about that here." Um
Yeah, I mean, you know what? I find it endearing though, because it's good to know that somebody else is out there working as late as I do on a consistent
Uh,
basis. So I love to see it.
yeah, no, I don't sleep. So let's just
Yeah.
let's just dive in because I think you've kind of alluded to some of the points that we're going to make here in this episode. And the first segment is about disruption, right? Like it has like winter is here, disruption is here, and we've
Yeah.
talked. We've always talked about change, like it's looming, but like in reality, it's real. And I think typically like the traditional rules of GovCon, the relationships, long capture, um, even how traditionally, business development intel is sourced, it's shifted. So AI technologies,
Right.
this new administration has really kind of turned the whole, like the whole industry kind of on its head a little bit. So let's talk about, platforms like G2X. And there's a lot of copycatters out there. We're not going to throw any shade or any names, like out there to protect the innocent and the guilty. But, you've really, since taking on G2X, you and Alexa have kind of rewritten the playbook about how GovCon professionals track, engage, and win in real time.
Yeah, I mean, so first off, appreciate the kind words. We've worked really hard to, just add value. You hear me say this all the time. It's about, adding value, leading with value. And, the way we do that, it's not like, oh, I think technology has never been more of a commodity than it is today.
Mhm.
And I say this about software all the time. The things that matter most today are distribution and taste. What I mean by distribution is community.
Okay.
We've built community. We're out there, we engage, we work very hard to, maintain and develop customer intimacy so that we're responsive to their needs. We're not venture capital funded. So, we're customer funded. So we answer to our customers, not, not our investors. And taste, right? I think good software, good products are opinionated. We have a viewpoint, and it's reflected in our brand language. It's reflected in the way that we, prioritize new features, the way our features work in the platform, and the way that we engage in real life. Right. So we're not just a software platform. It's really a go to market accelerator for federal contractors. We do educational events. We do networking events. We're not a media company, but it's important to have that community, like I said. Um, and those two things, that distribution and taste, I think, are what has helped us succeed in this environment, right? Especially when there are so many participants in the
Yeah.
arena. And the thing, and I think there's room, for folks. There's room for everybody. But I do think that, traditionally, this industry, the vertical SaaS players in this industry, have had a heavy focus, maybe over indexed on data, more data, more
Yeah.
data. And I think what is more important is context. How do you empower, how do you activate your users to be able to use the data that they're being presented to actually win, to do something? It's got to be actionable. It's not market intelligence until it has context.
Hmm.
And I think about our friend Guy Timberlake, and he's a mentor of mine, and I really respect um, uh, his knowledge, vast knowledge of the industry, and I've learned a lot from him. He talks about context all the time, and I think it's critically important for folks that have access to tools, whatever tool you use, even the publicly available ones, FPDS, USA Spending, whatever the case may be. You got to understand how to use that data. And so, we bring those things together: data, context, and opportunity.
Hmm.
Making sure that people get in front of the right people that can lead to lead to new deals. And we package that all together, and it's been successful so far. We're growing, and we just continue to try to find new ways to enrich the customer base, and even those that we don't directly serve. We still try to get people in the tent and give them something they can use.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I think, you know, my last parting thought about that, because we could turn this entire episode into a G2X, type of promo, but
Yeah,
there's
but that's not
that's
why we're
not
here.
why
We
we're
know
here. But
that.
I think at the end of the day, your approach is exactly like how any government contractor or anyone who is selling a service or a product to maybe the end customer or the government or whatever is to understand from a end user perspective, what is it that they value, and like you said, you use the term context, but yeah, it's like, well, like I get very overwhelmed by data. I need the data to be carefully kind of aggregated and presented to me. And sometimes I don't even know why certain data is important until you reframe it and present it in a way like, hey, did you know that you could use this data or this information, or we've created a dashboard or we've created a report to kind of present that. And it's just that whole power of suggestion, the power, like, I think that's very powerful. That kind of sets everybody kind of apart because, like you said, this is such a large market. There is room for everybody. And I think that there are different tools out there that are good for different, like different purposes. And so it's just something that everyone kind of needs to evaluate for themselves. And your needs evolve and they kind of change as your company matures,
That's right.
and things like that. So you may use, like your company or your tool for one purpose, and then maybe use another one another time for another opportunity, just because it's a better fit. So
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
So, anyways, so let's kind of transition into the myth of stability in GovCon, right? Like just when you think you got it all figured out, something happens, a new administration comes in.
Oh man.
So this is kind of like this. I'm going to drop this bomb and step away here for a second, but yeah, like government.
Okay. I mean, look.
No, seriously, but I think
Go ahead. I got a
you
perfect
get a perfect comeback.
analogy here, or a perfect story.
Exactly. So, I think a lot of times people come into government contracting over this false sense of security. And I think consultants like myself have kind of sold it like the government are good payers, they're very consistent, they're predictable, change is much slower. And also there's this added, like the saying too that we have is that, if we've always done a certain way, it'll be fine, or it's good enough for government work, or like government is risk
Right.
averse. But with every administration there's policy changes, people in decision making positions, the what is it, the musical chairs of who's in charge, changes every 4 or 8 years. But this year is unprecedented. I think we can all agree on that.
It is.
But from
It
your
is.
vantage
Yeah.
point, Ron, like what do you see as being like the most significant like blind spot that I think government leaders are like refusing to acknowledge? And like how can industry
Yeah.
kind of peel back that onion or that curtain, like on that?
Yeah. So I mean, firstly, I'll touch on I call it selling dreams, right? Of government contracting, federal contracting specifically. I learned really early on that nothing is safe, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But the dream has always been, hey, federal government is more stable. They've got a longer sales cycle, but it's lower margin and safer. But if you go on the commercial side and professional services, shorter sales cycle.
Higher
It can be higher
margins. Yep.
margins. Yeah, it's so not as safe, and so that's kind of been the juxtaposition of those two. And I would say state and local, and my experience has moved faster. And I've been a part of many state and local initiatives. But the story I mentioned. So was that Department of Education? I was contracted there. I think I mentioned this, and you know I came to work on a Friday and found out I didn't have a job, right? And I thought everything was okay, and myself, my counterpart, my boss, um, And this was before I understood the concept of option years.
Oh,
You know, this is my first job, right? My first job in software. I didn't know what was going on. So this was before I understood anything about federal contracting, right? And so, we're chugging along, everything's okay. And then we show up to work on, a Friday, and we're like, oh, you can go home. We decided not to renew the option year. And I didn't really have a warning, I'd say, from my boss. I don't know that he had much of a warning, but now that I know what I know, you have to
yeah,
be, ready to pivot when these things come at you. Life comes at you fast, right? As they say. So I learned really early on that, okay, federal contracting is in many cases, a an objectively safer bet on paper. But in that situation, I learned how fast things change. And I went, the time after, that option year wasn't renewed, I spent a lot of time just learning how this stuff works so that I'm prepared
yeah.
next time. And that's a great segue to, yeah,
No, I
go
was
ahead.
just gonna say, government contracting, she is a moody mistress. Okay. And you never
Mhm.
quite know when you're gonna fall in and out of favor. Like funding can change. Funding tends to be a little bit more consistent, especially if it's O&M type of contracts and things like that. But now that you're in the know, you kind of know, right? Like, but you're right, and I think that's kind of the most challenging things to explain to people who are new to GovCon. And I think that's why I'm on this mission this year is to expose all GovCon hashtag GovCon grifters. Is that there's an
Oh man,
industry.
we can go
Oh my
all
god,
day.
that's like a whole podcast in itself. But there's like this
Yeah, so
industry
that's another. Yeah,
that kind of preys on people who don't know, and they're like, oh well, you can go from zero to like $1 million like overnight and do nothing, and like do pass throughs and do like the middleman approach and stuff like that. I'm like,
right, right.
shit like that will get you arrested. um
Yeah, you can go from zero to $1 million to prison real
right,
fast,
like I
right?
don't. Yes, I like orange. I look
Right,
good in orange, but I don't want to be wearing it, like 24/7.
right, right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, so about that, I've seen it for a while. I mean, there are some folks that are out there providing genuinely valuable content, but you know, unfortunately, there's multiple things here at play. Um, Unfortunately, there are a lot of people that are, have a cursory level, or maybe even a journeyman or intermediate level understanding of federal contracting. They know enough to make compelling content. In the way that these platforms work, TikTok, YouTube, the more views you
Yeah.
have, right, the better monetization you can get through ads. And that's just the name of the game, right? So you're incentivized to put out things that are compelling, that get people to, feel hopeful about their prospects in a field that they know nothing
Truth be
about,
damned, right?
right?
Truth be damned. Like, it
And
doesn't matter if it's
yeah, truth be damned, right? And so that's how a lot of folks make money. It's not about, or they're selling courses or like ebooks or
mhm.
something like that. You have it, all over the place. It's like the crypto world and all the rest of the scammers. So it's kind of funny because, and I read an article the other day that basically said, buying a small business is the new house flipping. It's the new get rich
Oh,
quick
interesting.
thing. And I don't know if you've seen the trends of, folks doing the entrepreneurship through
Oh, yeah.
acquisition kind of pipeline. And so this guy, he wrote an article. I thought it was pretty amusing. And I'm like, he's not wrong,
Yep.
right? Because you have folks that have no operational experience. They're coming out of white collar roles, and they're going to go buy a plumbing company and operate it. So when you have that first ownership transition meeting, and you got a bunch of guys that are sitting around and looking at you like, who is this clown and why is he wearing a suit, right?
Yeah.
That you have problems. And so you can't just walk into federal contracting, as you know, and follow these things that are either illegal or just not going to work out. They have a low success rate. And the truth remains that if there's something too good, if it sounds too good
Yeah.
to be true, then it probably
Yeah.
is. So yeah, yeah. We
I
again,
know.
we can do a whole
Yeah.
podcast on that
Yeah.
world, right?
Sorry, intellectuals, for that slight rabbit hole detour. But it had to be said. But yeah, so for the most part, this whole fallacy of stability, easy game, and things like that. I don't think it's going to go away, and I think this is the reason why. It was one of the reasons why I wanted to start this podcast, was that there's so much noise out there of people who are just disseminating incorrect information or making it sound, not that I'm not an optimistic person, I'm more a pragmatic person than optimistic, but I think you really need to
Yeah,
understand, like, the grind is real. The risks and the
it's
stakes are
absolutely
high,
yes.
and it's a huge
Yes.
investment. And so, like, would you rather do it right or rather
Yeah.
do it quick? I don't, you know what I mean? Like, again, everyone's got their own reason for going into business, but
Yeah. I mean, to that point, you think about. Are you familiar with the contractor's triangle?
I'm not.
So you can have two of the three, points. So, and it's more so like the general contractor, but you can apply it to anything. There's fast, so you can have something
Ah,
quick, you can have something high quality, and you can have something cheap. Pick two,
yeah,
right? So, if you want something, fast, high quality, and good, the chances are pretty slim. And if somebody is or fast, high quality, I'm sorry, and cheap, the chances are slim, right? You're going to pay a lot of money for someone to do a great job really quickly. And so that just goes back to what you mentioned a second ago. It's like it applies to opportunities that you're presented
hmm
with, right? If you are looking at starting any kind of business, you got to know that you're not going to be able to have like a Goldilocks. Let's
yep,
put it that way, a Goldilocks situation where all of the headwinds are not in your
yep.
face, right? Where you have none of those problems. So it's just a fact of
Yep.
life.
No, absolutely. So again, we're going to come up that rabbit hole here because I do want to go back and talk a little bit about data, um, which I think is like insider knowledge. Like, data is gold. It's been king and it's been gold for quite a while. But let's be honest, people who used to rely on, like, the old way of getting your intel, like lunches, lobbying, like, and not saying that those don't happen now. But now information kind of moves much quicker. It's kind of unfiltered, it's kind of raw, that's out there. And
Right,
so it can be kind of
right,
risky, right? Like, I don't trust a lot of the data, the information I get sometimes, until I can validate it. Like, Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. And so, like, at
yep,
G2X,
yep.
because you do handle a lot of data, like, how has G2X, like, disrupted kind of this, like, the BD industry by turning that data, because you really masterfully have turned that data into, like, power. So talk to me about, like, some trends, what people kind of underestimate. And I love how data has become democratized, for opportunities, whereas
Mhm.
before it used to be really tightly held, right? Only certain people had the data, or knew how to get it, or knew how to use it. And so there is
Right.
so much more transparency, and accessibility, to it now, almost a little too much.
Yeah, well, then if you think about it, more competition, it is
hmm
better. It drives prices down for the government. Ultimately, saves taxpayers dollars, right? Um, so we can come back to that later. But as far as G2X is concerned, one of the critical things about our operation is that there's a significant curated market intelligence component. We've recently augmented that with a few of the more traditional tabular data interfaces, and we've evolved the platform very rapidly over the past year. But at the core of it, one of the things that makes G2X really useful to people, our customers are, the smallest of the smallest and largest of the largest, by the way, is being able to tell people what's important and why. And what that really means is, every day we're giving people information relevant to them. We understand your market, your role in your market, and we're feeding you things that are likely relevant to you. And there's lots of data as far as when certain key individuals move from organization to organization, certain key events, like who's speaking, who you should be speaking
Mm-hmm.
to. As a matter of fact, we built an AI tool recently where you can just put your LinkedIn in there and it'll look at all the events in our curated database and tell you which ones you should probably think about attending and why. Right. And it really goes back to the first thing we discussed, which is it's adding context to data. We could easily just throw something at you where it's a big table of here are all the contract awards, here are all the contract opportunities. Oh, you can sort and filter. Cool. A kid can build that in a weekend. It's not all that useful unless you have context and you understand why this stuff matters to you based on your role, based on your company's objectives. Additionally, we track hot opportunities coming out and tend to write research reports that help people in their capture process have a better chance at wrangling these upcoming opportunities. So, we do post a ton of analyst reports out there. We last year launched a directory. It's another thing, a free and open directory of 500,000 plus contractors across every single industry, where we have, excuse me, we have all of your all of your contract wins, all of your subcontract wins, all of your vehicles, relevant recent news, trend analysis, all of those things. It's called the GovCon directory. And that has blown up in popularity. We've had hundreds of thousands of people use it since we launched it. As a matter of fact, in a couple of weeks, maybe even next week, I'll be launching an index that basically shows which companies have the most visited profiles on that directory, the top 2,500 or so, and out of hundreds of thousands. And really just to give people a concept of what the directory does, but also why it's important to keep your online
Yeah.
presence updated. And that's another key thing too. I mean, just regardless of what G2X provides, a really important thing as search engines, particularly Google, are offering AI
Mhm.
answers, and citing those answers. When someone Googles your UEI, your SAM unique unique entity identifier, or Googles your company's name, right? Having relevant information is going to make that AI response a lot richer, so that when someone goes in, types the search, they'll get everything they need without having to even go anywhere, right? And obviously, they can look at the sources that Google used, but I'm finding more and more of my searches are just, I don't have to go to the website. I just see the answer
Yeah.
right there. So having a broad, broad coverage of your online presence is important. So that's one of those things we've done to really help the community, by putting all that out there. It's all indexed by the search engines. It's free SEO for everyone that's in the federal contracting space. But that's also context. You're trying to look up a potential teaming partner. You're trying to look up a competitor, or your procurement professional. And we hear this a lot. You're a procurement professional performing market research. Government uses G2X free. So even though you don't have to log into the GovCon directory to get the data, they go in there and they can quickly, find things they need in their market research journey. So, I mean, I could go all day. I mean, we've got an AI proposal automation platform that we're getting ready to release a new version of. We've got a teaming partner matching platform that is in development. So there's a lot of things that we're trying to do. But I think what's really important to underscore here is that yes, the whole walk the halls, mentality, and you kind of
Hmm.
hinted at it earlier, Tom, which is going to lunches and going to things. It's it's not gone. I mean, I if you read the room and understand RTO is a thing, return to office, it's going to be more and more important for folks to have targeted, meaningful
Yeah,
engagements in person. And there's a lot of folks that have been really craving
yeah,
that, right? And another trend that we're seeing is, you know, in-person events have tended to be focused around awards and then your typical networking thing where people just come together and drink. We've been getting a lot of demand from our customers to do training events, to do educational events, to help them understand how to do their jobs better. If you're a business development or a capture professional, you know how can I use your data, your platform, or your expertise, right? Because we've all done the job. Um, how do we use that set of assets, right, to do our jobs better? What can you teach us, right? So it's like, yeah, there's plenty of people just doing networking happy hours and things like that, but people are
yeah,
looking for more, and especially as they're going to be asked to do more with less, with the whole be prepared. Probably talk about this in a second, but be prepared to write a lengthy justification for your contracts. Um, but they're going to be asked to do more with less, and that's always the case, but more so now than ever. So you're going to have to be more effective at your job, um, and a larger force multiplier for your firm. So what we're trying to do, and we opened up an office in the Seven Spaces GovCon co-working place in Tyson's Corner a couple of
hmm,
weeks ago. And with that, we intend to host a ton of programming that is not only going to be networking, but it's going to
yeah.
be enrichment.
I think
So those things combined
yeah, I
is
think I
yeah,
think there's a delicate balance, right, that you need to have. Is that I think you don't live in the DC area either, and so having moved from being in central, like the mecca of where everything happens, and moved
yeah,
like you and I both have done that deliberately and intentionally, is that I
yeah,
find that my conversations, my stock value has kind of increased because now no one wants to waste my time when I'm there. So it's like I'm there, I'm going to be deliberate, I'm going to be very
right,
targeted.
right,
And so you have this window with me. No one cancels meetings with me anymore. So it's kind of beautiful. So it's like, okay, don't waste my time.
yeah. It is.
And you get it all done, and then you kind of go back and like do everything. So I think there's something to be said about being very deliberate in your time and in your data. So let's kind of move
Yeah,
on to the real movers, right? Speaking of moving, let's the real movers, like who's actually playing like the long game. Because I'm a chess player, I'm like all
right.
about the long game here, and in an industry and in a time frame where we're so much a zero sum type of industry, everyone talks about positioning, but talk is kind of cheap. You gotta like back it up with like some actions. And so not everybody's playing chess. A lot of people are playing checkers, and I want to even say they're playing a really bastardized version of checkers. And with like missing pieces, like and everything. But I think,
Right,
like
right, right.
you know, the who's adapting to some of these shifting landscapes, because the health IT, the cybersecurity, the AI, it's a very evolving, shifting type of industry. So based on what you're seeing, who's kind of quietly gaining some ground while others are still kind of playing by the old, playbook?
Yeah, I mean, so first and foremost, I love the chess analogy. Alexa and I talk a lot about playing Go. The
Yes.
ancient Chinese board game. 19 by 19 grid,
I
very,
love it.
very complex. And I think more people should learn Go and should start thinking about how to really play that long game. But I'll talk less specifically about, firms, certain firms, but more about
Hmm.
sectors and more about
Yeah.
trends, right? Health IT, cyber, AI. You really need to look at how this administration is spending. It's like one of those things where there's talk and then there's action. Look at the actions. Follow what people follow what the administration is doing, and if you follow that, you'll see where the opportunity is, right? And you look at the types of firms that are winning. And this is we're early in the administration, but you look at the type of firms that are winning. You look at the relationships that the key players at those firms. That's one of the
Yeah.
things G2X really spends a lot of time thinking about. But you look at the executive team. You understand who they have relationships with. Um, and where they're spending their time if they're showing up at events. So this is kind of like the deeper kind of OSINT,
Yes.
open source intelligence gathering that you should be doing. Spend time on LinkedIn. Look at the pictures. Look at the frequency at which you see people associated with certain events, certain people, certain organizations, and you can kind of piece together things as you go along based on that. And that's just one part, one tiny piece of the overall strategy. But I think fundamentally speaking, you should look at which industries are receiving funding. I mean, I think it's as simple as that. I think you would agree, Tana. It's like if you don't start there, what are you doing, right? And you should, based on that, always diversify where possible. Always, retain that ability to pivot, and follow the actions of the government as far as what they're procuring.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I love OSINT, by the way. So I'm very intuitive about that, and there are definitely there are definitely sectors that are hurting. I'm trying to be very sympathetic, but
Hmm.
I think with everything kind of goes in cycles. There are certain things that kind of peak and then they'll
Yeah.
sunset. And I think the most successful companies out there are those who are able to kind of see, anticipate, try to kind of stay ahead of this. Um, but I don't think it's going to be a very long 4 years if your company is going to butt head and be at odds with this administration. And there are advocacy groups, there are lobbyists, there are associations that are going to be out there who are advocating for their specific like niche type of, industry or
Yeah.
technologies or whatever. And I think that's great. Do that. I think we need them. There's a place for that. And that's the beauty of living in this republic that we call the US. But if you are a business and you're in professional services and you've had an entire like let's say you were a USAID company or you did, foreign service type of work, you may want to rethink diversifying your portfolio a little bit. Um, just because, or you just might as well close shop.
Yeah.
So, just kind of staying ahead and being able to kind of like read that and anticipate that a little bit more, I think is really kind of critical.
Yeah. I think it's a lot of folks, and I agree with this to some extent, try to avoid media. But I think given that we're so early in the administration, it does also make sense to keep a pulse on what's being said. Understand sentiment, and to get your news from
Hmm.
diversely aligned viewpoints. And also, there's a lot that happens in platforms like LinkedIn is one, but a lot happens on X, a lot happens on Blue Sky, where you can kind of understand sentiment by following prominent individuals on those platforms to kind of see where things are going. So, for example, unfortunately, from my observation, there's been a lot of you know, a lot of focus on reimagine or not reimagining, but rethinking the value of the consultants. Right, that's one of the things that we've seen
Oh,
pop up a lot, and I'm talking more so in the commercial space. You have big consultancies have come
yep,
under fire, and I think I can't make a judgment call as to why that is, right? But it's happening, and that's one of the things you just have to pay attention to. It's not whether or not you like it, whether or not it's right, or whether it's not it's correct. It's really, hey, it's here. What are you going to do about it? So it's not really about what happens to you. It's about how you react to
yeah.
what happens to you. To be able to pivot.
No,
Um, and again, going back to
no, no.
yeah, go ahead. Well, I was going to say just going back to the other the thing I mentioned before is if there's one sector, we talked a little bit about AI. If there's one sector that we're going to see, a ton of money get pumped into, not even sector, but just specific, technology realm, is definitely going to be AI. So AI, as it applies to, you know, health information technology, how it applies to border security, how it applies to everything. Um, and the technology is becoming better and better. And I think if you're a technical services firm, you have that kind of that kind of expertise on your team. You'd be in good shape, I think, looking at the trends on who's buying AI products and services. I think that'll explode, and there's probably many other industries that you're going to see explosions into. So we're actually working on a report, and it won't be ready for a while, but basically to examine the trends of contract awards across industries, and that's not just focus on the sexy stuff, which is your professional services, your technical services.
Yeah,
Everybody talks about that. GovCon is
yes,
far bigger than that, and so we're going to be comprehensive and put out a report that gives people an understanding of you know where's the money going, and also where's the money going relative to the same preceding period and the other the previous administration, right? And that's a good thing to look at to understand. Okay, well, the first quarter, first 2 quarters of this administration here spent money here. Okay, this is what this administration is doing, right? And I think it's good to use what happened in the past as a barometer, even the past 2 quarters, right? So just using those different visualizations and aggregations of data to help people understand
yeah.
where things are going. Um,
History
so
history is important, right? Like, I think it's
yeah,
probably one of the most important classes that we
yeah,
should teach.
yeah,
And it's like unfiltered type of raw history, just the facts, ma'am, right? This happened, this was the environment, this was the situation. Don't drive any conclusions or anything like that. It's just
right,
like, let's
right.
just, kind of look at it holistically. So let's we're running up against a little bit of time here, but I want to like get to our last segment, which is you find out your playbook is obsolete and now what? Right. So I want to get a little prescriptive. I tend to not be prescriptive in my podcast because I like telling people what to do, like on engagement, but I don't really like telling people what to do in like my podcast. But for our intellectuals out
Mhm.
there, kind of clinging to your pearls about, all these outdated type of capture models and PowerPoint slides and BD processes and the Shipley approach and like this whole compliance mindset, you got to do this many gate reviews and stuff like that. Like, what do you think contractors need to do to stay kind of relevant? And what's one bold move that you would challenge this industry and professionals to do before the end of this fiscal year?
Yeah, I mean, so let's start with the bold move, and it's something I've been, very intentionally focused on practicing myself is challenge deeply held
Okay.
beliefs, at every turn. Challenge your deeply held beliefs at every turn. That's not just a business thing; it's a life thing, right? And I'll go back to the topic at hand and kind of address what I think has been helpful for me. There's a guy by the name of Ray Dalio, and he runs a firm called Bridgewater Associates. And it's, it's a, how do I put it? It's if not, I'm not mistaken, the largest hedge fund in the world. Anyhow, he wrote a book called Principles, and I've read it a couple times. And just like any book, you don't take it
Yeah.
as gospel. You take what take what works. And if you disagree with something, you should probably understand both viewpoints or all the different viewpoints involved. But what I did take away, one of the many things I took away, was this concept of believability. And it's kind of like ranking the methods, the advice, or whatever that you get from other people, other organizations, by their believability.
Interesting.
Like, do they have the eminence? Yeah, like, do they have the eminence to give this advice that they just gave you? And it makes sense. Like, have they
Hmm.
been there? Have they done that? Like, I'm trying to think of a good analogy. I'll probably screw it up. But like, would you, trust a school teacher to give you advice on how to fly an airplane, right? It's probably not really believable, right? It's probably a wild analogy too, but
Yeah.
you get the point. So that goes with, if you pull on that thread, you say, well, we're a small team, we're trying to figure out how to pivot, how to change our process to, be more successful. And, we have this echo chamber, as many small companies do. There's like an echo chamber that can form among the executive team, among the leadership team, where, you guys tend to focus or focus all your thoughts on these deeply held beliefs that were either put there by the founder or the CEO or whoever, and
Hmm.
everybody just kind of coalesces around those beliefs. And you can take believability to a deeper level by kind of thinking, okay, well, who else that looks kind of like us or that we want to be like or are on the path or seems like they're on the path a little bit further ahead of us, that's been successful. What are they doing, right? Critically examining what others have done in the world of in your professional world, whatever it is, right? And I'm just speaking more broadly, but in the GovCon sense, you see companies that do what you do and they're
Right.
successful. How have they done that? What are the processes that they've implemented, to be successful? And that's where the concept of believability escapes, your organization, and then you can kind of steal smartly
Hmm.
from the outside world. So it's kind of like the concept of pattern matching, right? But if you apply it to a company, like for G2X, there are known principles that make a software company successful. Like, there are known things that you can do. I'd hate to use the cliche best practices, but there are known things that you can do, known patterns you can
Right.
match to, known patterns you can follow to increase your chances of success. Now, I'm not saying you have to
Right.
go out and copy, but you can do things that have been proven to work in the past. And, by trying to challenge those deeply held beliefs and looking at who's
Hmm.
already there that you want to be like or is already on that journey, and taking inspiration from them, is a really helpful thing to do. And it kind of goes back to the book thing, right? There's a quote, I forget who it's attributable to, but I think it goes something along the lines of, books are my best mentors, right? And when you think of it in that context, it's the same thing, right? You're looking at other people's experiences, that you may look up to, you may aspire to be similar to professionally someday, and
Yeah.
taking those tidbits that you can experiment with on in your own life. And speaking of experiments, there's another concept. I think it was Jeff Bezos from Amazon that he talked a lot about running experiments, right? And this may not be applicable to a GovCon. I mean, you have slow moving parts, right? But in terms of internal processes and things like that, depending on how much you have going on, you know, you don't really know what's successful until you've tried, a I don't say a sizable amount of things, but if you until you've tried enough things to see what sticks. And when you find something that works for you, whatever it is, whether it's
Mhm.
a capture strategy or an internal operating strategy, something like EOS comes to mind. A lot of people talk about that. When you find something that works, stick with it, right? But I think you have to challenge those
Yeah, so
beliefs and you have to try.
I think to kind of like tie up what you're saying, and I'm going to challenge you a little bit on this. And since it's my show, I'm going to get the last word on this topic. But um, the Malcolm Gladwell had something very similar in his Tipping Point book. In that, the successful people like the Beatles and Gates, Wozniak, all those guys, there were a certain number of hours and certain like trials and errors that they had to go through in order to kind of like be successful. And so it's that
Hmm.
speeding up and fast pacing that the point of failure, right? Like rush to fail, and that like that's something that I kind of subscribe to
Yep.
is that you need to kind of rush and learn how to fail in order for you to kind of succeed. It's counterintuitive, it's very
Yeah.
uncomfortable, and I think that's a place where I don't think a lot of people like to be. Just because we have this society where we put on such airs of like success. This is what success looks like, right? And so you've got this perception of what you should be and what it should
Hmm.
feel like and how you get there. And so I think my challenge to the
Hmm.
whole um, like book thing is that there are a lot of book smart people, and there's a lot of people who write books, and there's a lot of people who hide behind training, and they talk about real applications of business development, capture, and proposals, but they don't know a damn thing about
Yeah.
winning, right? And so it's
I
one
don't
of those
know.
book
Right.
smarts versus
They've.
being street smart, type of person. Like, so I'm kind of a hybrid person. I don't really care for classes and books. I read. Yes, I'm not illiterate.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think it's really important for you to
Yeah.
understand, and it goes back again to the context situation. You need to really understand when and why to apply certain principles before you truly understand um, why you're doing it, right? Like you can
Right.
be taught how to do something, and you can be told that it's important to do this. But until you've been kind of put in the trenches or boots on the ground, and you're
Right.
you're actually faced with doing it yourself, or faced with having to solve a problem and actually have to execute critical thinking, you really don't quite know how to make certain decisions or what tool to use or whatever until you're kind of faced with that.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
You know. You know. That's the thing. We're absolutely aligned on that. I think, and so I think what that experimentation part is really, and I like to call
Okay.
it being in the arena, right? You can't take
Yeah.
advice from people who are not in the arena, who've never been in the arena. Like I'm in the arena, you're in the arena, right? You're not going to take advice from somebody that
Oh
has
no,
never
we need
actually
we
done the
need
job,
t-shirts.
right?
Like
And that's where
follow
the
the gladiator. We
experimentation
need
comes
t-shirts.
from.
Like something with a gladiator. Oh my god,
Follow the
GovCon
gladiator.
gladiators. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, GovCon Gladiators. I love it. I love it. And then we can have a
There you
whole
go.
game show and all that. So no, but this is the thing. I think having the theory and having the practice are both important. So I'm a musician too, and it's like I play a bunch of instruments, and I kind of just vibed it, in the past when I was first learning and just playing. Oh, you get experience by playing, but it's been so impactful to
Mhm.
understand the theory, right? And how music theory enriches your ability to play, right? And so it's one of those things where you have to be in the arena, but you also have to hone your
Yeah.
craft, from that theoretical perspective. But I think in this realm, it's so important to do the job, and you don't know you don't know
Yeah.
what you don't know, and you don't learn until you're in the arena.
Yeah.
So I think we're absolutely there, and it goes back to the experimentation thing. You got to run experiments. You got to fail. You
Yeah,
got to fail.
exactly.
Um,
Oh my god, I love
so
this conversation.
I,
We
I, I definitely um, I definitely
Yeah,
agree there.
we seriously could have this conversation all day, and neither you and I have like the time here today to do this. But
We
I
could, we
know.
could,
I just want to
we
wrap
could.
up a few
Hey, maybe at the
part
next
two. Yeah,
Alamo
like we'll
event,
do a part two to like this episode here. Um, so let's kind of head into like a couple of key takeaways here as we kind of wrap up our conversation. And like here's the truth: disruption is on the horizon. It's here. And it's already embedded in how government operates, and so I think we need to kind of embrace that, and that firms that are waiting for stability or a return to the normal are just really kind of wasting their time as the market and industry kind of moves forward without skipping a beat. But it's nice, Ron, to hear that platforms like G2X are kind of with us. You're in partnership with us. You're helping to kind of prove that data is now more powerful and teaching us how to use that. So that we can not only capitalize on our relationships, but kind of use this information to be better, work smarter, and be smarter. And so, like right now, if you're not plugged in to some of these real time shifts, like agency priorities, funding patterns, or some of these competitive moves that some of these sectors are changing to, you're going to kind of like
Right.
be behind. So I know that that's a lot that we've kind of covered, and we've kind of talked a little bit about like the playbook and different things like that. But I think in this new game, the winners aren't the loudest; they're just the most prepared. So, what are some of your last parting thoughts, Ron, for our
Yeah.
intellectuals here before we sign off?
Yeah, I mean, wow, there's so many different of these conversations, so many of these that we've just had that we could turn into whole episodes, I think. But I think my parting, takeaways are just reiterations of what I've said before. Um, you know, and fundamentally challenging deeply held beliefs and trying to, play devil's advocate for yourself on how you've done things in the past. Because when you're presented with a situation where what you're doing is no longer effective, you really have no choice. What is that saying about
Yeah,
insanity? Insanity. The definition of insanity is doing the same
expecting
thing
a different.
over and over again and expecting,
Mhm.
a different result. So that is probably my biggest takeaway, right? And another thing that's important,
Yeah.
humility. You know, yeah, it's being humble enough to know and to truly internalize
Hmm.
that you don't know everything, and that perspectives outside of your own are, it can be, they have the ability to be more effective for what you're trying to accomplish than what you believe is going to work. That's another thing. I think, leading with humility in all of your interactions, all of your endeavors, I think is an important thing
Yeah,
to
no,
practice as well.
exactly. And so I think that's a wrap. So, wrapping today's episode of Tan's Two Cents, I want to thank you, Ron, for finally being here. And we will definitely do a part two, three, and four on follow up topics, and for sharing your insights on how to win in GovCon.
Great. Thanks, Ton. And thanks, Intellectuals. And
Oh,
hope to be back.
absolutely. And to all my intellectual listeners here today, remember the rules are changing, the players are shifting, and the playbook is yours to rewrite. So stay informed, agile, and focused on what moves the needle. So thanks again, intellectuals, for listening here today. Remember, you have to think big to win big. Be an intellectual. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of possibilities.